What the hell is today? Today is the 17th of February, if the camera will behave. And we are in the local vigilance area yet again. We've had some fresh snow this morning. I didn't check the weather, so I didn't expect that, but good for tracking. We'll do that today and have something to discuss, which may turn into a research project during the warmer months once I get a better understanding of it. I posted about it on Facebook, so we'll discuss that in greater detail. Some of you may, or god damn this fucking camera, it may or may not be exactly. I have to wrap my mind around a little bit more, but we're going to do that today. And rather than get annoyed with the camera moving around independently, because this, my other gimbal, although much larger and clunkier, does actually have more stationary control over than this one. It kind of has more of a mind of its own, but or I haven't learned the actual settings that well, but one thing at a time. So let's get going, see what tracks we can find out here, and we'll discuss some things and see where the rest of the day takes us. Thanks. We have switched cameras because the gimbal I was using is not proving to be stable enough. Going forward, I'll have to bring the other one. Once you have it on the right setting, it at least holds still, and if you point that way, it points that way. The other one's kind of doing this little shimmy thing that's a little too free. This one may be a little bit more shaky in my hand, but I point it in a given direction, that's what you see. Rather than having me constantly being distracted by trying to wrestle with the thing and make it do its thing. I might even do the intro again, just because I was doing that too and it got me annoyed. The camera itself is fine. The gimbal is not. If there's a way to lock the fucking thing, I should go back and read the instructions. Maybe there is, but as of right now, we're going to do this for the sake of simplicity today, and then I'll go back and read through the instructions. I still have the box and all that, so we'll do that. Maybe there's a way to lock the damn thing. That would be helpful, because it is a fairly stable thing otherwise. But if it's not going to work that way, I have the bigger one. That one's just a little bit more. It's more moving parts, which means assembling it in the field is a bit of a pain in the rear. Anyway, let's get back to where the fuck we were. Before I got fed up with the alternative gimbal camera setup, the reason why I don't wear the head mountable one is I'm scratching my head now because my head's itchy, and then you're getting all this. You cannot have like a head worn camera and not move through an environment like this where you're ducking under stuff, where you're not going to have head bobbing, possibly car sickness inducing for the audience motion. It just, you can't just walk like a robot stiff through the fucking woods. It cannot be done. Sorry. You slip, that kind of thing happens. So, got into a brief disagreement, a civil one, I think, but still, with a gentleman on the neighboring group out of Massachusetts. He made the claim, and this is an engineer making the claim, he seems to think what I would call a scofftic is what he calls a skeptic. And no, critical thinking in this endeavor is critical, to kind of like double pun myself, but it is a matter of criticality to having an objective viewpoint and not being one of the goofs out here that just wants to go out in the woods and look into a scene right here. We'll use this and point there, and then by the time he gets back home, he's got 17 freaking red circles where he sees a virtual legion of Sasquatch around him. If you do, how come you don't just walk up and freaking approach one and say hi? You want to know why? Because you're a lying sack of shit who's basically wasting everybody's time, and you're just basically adding to the white noise that ruins the subject for everyone else. The more I see these idiots, the less time I have to humor them, because it's a waste of time. So like Tree Peaker's guy who's doing that kind of shit, you're wasting my time. So shut up and stop making content. Put yourself in the loony bin. That is where you belong. I made a resolution this year I was going to stop being, even remotely nice about this. There's no point to it. Because these idiots are basically ruining the subject for everybody else. And fuck them for it, frankly. Anyway. Moving right along. This guy made the claim in specifically northeastern Massachusetts, there are easily 6 Bigfoot for every black bear. By east, I guess you're talking about the area of Massachusetts that's adjoining New Hampshire and kind of like facing along the coast, like Gloucester, that area. You may not have an overabundance of black bears, and having not spent a lot of time in that area, specifically in Mass, I will concede I don't know off the top of my head how forested or not a region that is. I would think it's more coastal and maritime-ish. Although coastal Connecticut along the Sound, which I'm not going to call an ocean because that would be a stretch, the dumping ground of past mafia guy parts in a large body of water. The occasional great white shark named Cabot swims through. And yes, we do get the odd great white through there, which is interesting. They are actually active in all 7 oceans. There's 7 continents. I'm just going to assume there's that many oceans, whatever. If I fuck that up, scold me in the comments, whatever. I'll take the hit. But even along that region, the point being, there are small tracts of forest. What you have more of, though, are the examples of another neat little ecosystem, which is the reedlands and the salty marsh areas where you run into like a lot of egrets and herons and fish catching birds and that kind of thing. So not so much a squatching paradise, but if you're a bird watcher, that probably changes it up, because I did that one winter and I was able to see peregrine falcons. I haven't seen a bald eagle there, but we do actually have one in our neighborhood now, which is massively cool. I've yet to get him to cooperate for a picture, but I've seen him twice now, so he's nesting somewhere in the area, which is really cool, because those are awesome birds. If you haven't figured it out, I love raptors. Anytime you see a raptor and you get it on camera, that's awesome. Worth the trip for that alone. That being said, you can see, what did I see? I saw plovers, I saw an egret or 2. Ducks are a given. And it was just, it's a different day out, but it was a nice day out. But going down there, typically speaking, I'm not in Sasquatch mode because it's an entirely different ecosystem. And despite the claims of some people that operate out of that group, they're just not there. And the reason I say that is not because of the ecosystem difference. I suppose a large monkey person could survive off of shellfish. That would make me wonder what their handling of cholesterol is, but that notwithstanding, they could operate on a more maritime, shellfishy diet. But the thing is, if you drive along Route 1 in Connecticut and you see how closely packed these towns are together, you're not hiding a monkey person in there. There is literally no way. I mean, yes, there are small tracts of forest if you move further inland, but they're not big. They're not that big. And the 2 state forests, no, the 1 state forest that's near there that I've been in fairly recent times, is exceedingly well humanly trafficked. There's not like prostitution or slave labor, but you have a healthy amount of hunters, hikers, dog walkers, the odd horse rider going through there. There's no shortage of these folks in there. And if you legitly had something going on in there, it would not stay a secret for long. You just have too many people going through there. There's parts of central and eastern Connecticut where, yeah, you have forest, but you also have a lot of people in there. In fact, when we did the Connecticut episode of Finding Bigfoot, though I despise the show for its repetitious nature, and 2 other people in the group I reference out of Mass who are all buddy-buddy with the guys from that show. Too fucking bad. I have a right to my opinion. If you don't like it, fuck you anyway. I said it. I'm going to say it. I don't hate the BFRO. I don't hate everybody in the BFRO. And there are those that say that, you know, Finding Bigfoot was not linked to the BFRO, which is bullshit. If you're trying to tell me there wasn't a link to that show, you're a liar. Anything where you have Monkey Maker and his involvement, and you can tell my respect for him based on my reference to his name, he is everything wrong with the BFRO. But if he's involved in a project, the BFRO is there. Another favorite of mine just this week, when you get into, let's cover that real quick. What is my problem with the BFRO? Their for-profit nature. You want to go out on an expedition with them, even if you're somebody like myself who's been doing this for a considerable amount of time and can bring skills to the table. I mean, aside from just my knowledge on the subject of Bigfoot, which I've been doing for more than 2 decades now, I also bring to the table hunting knowledge, fishing knowledge, bushcraft-related knowledge. I have been a 4-season hiker for now 2 decades. I tend to know what the fuck I'm doing out here. And yes, I've actually gotten lost, which goes to show it can happen to the best of us. But that also is an educational tool to learn how to not do it again. So I've actually been in a situation where that's happened, where I can draw a reference the next time, because I have gotten turned around since, not on the same level, but, and that's only because when I go out in Vermont and the woods are that much bigger and more wide open, I tend to be more, I won't say paranoid, I'll just say more careful, and I plan out the trip more. And I use navigational tools like natural waterways to work my way in and out of an area. Even if there's a potentially faster way out, if you get turned around, the undergrowth in there can get really thick. And in one particular area, you can turn yourself around in there very well, and you're going to be in there a while. Not so much because you're that far away from civilization per se, but because of the nature of the terrain. This is fairly open in here, which means in the distant past, this was probably timber harvested and opened up a bit. That tends to be the aim of things, and I know that from my forestry class. But I also bring that knowledge to the table too, the ecosystem of the general forest. I'm not Michael Merchant in that regard, who's a full-blown, he was a field biologist for, I think Maine calls it the DNR, Connecticut calls it the DEP. I do have a quasi-rant for them in a bit, but first of all, he actually worked for them as a field biologist, and he is a full-blown naturalist. I've been out in the woods with him, and I can vouch for the fact the man knows. If you were out here in the summer and you were looking out in this stretch right here, he would be able to pretty much identify any edible plant in the area if you ran out of food and you were in a dire straits. You wouldn't eat like a king, but you probably wouldn't starve to death either. So knowledge like that is not of value. Plain and simple. Now, that being said, as much as I don't like the show, I do, what the hell's the word you look for? Tend to like most of the people on the show. I never met Renee, where he found time they had their little where they were in Connecticut and they were talking about Connecticut seafood, and Monkey Maker was trying to patronize the good people of the Constitution State, or Nutmeg State, whichever you prefer. Renee was talking to a family of witnesses and seemed to be all business, even in a public relations format. She was basically doing her job as a researcher and a skeptic. She was talking to them and getting their version of events, which is a good thing to do. Didn't talk to her. I don't ever read on her personality, but I've never heard anything horrible about her either, so c'est la vie. Also, I have, however, met Bobo. I have met Cliff Barrickman, and they are very nice guys. I have nothing bad to say about them. Bobo is what Bobo is. The way you see him portrayed on the show is what he is. He is true to character. That's not a character he plays on TV. That's what he's like. He's a pleasant guy, and if you ended up around a campfire with him, you probably would have a very hard time not liking the guy because he's very likable. And Cliff is more of a down-to-earth kind of guy, like with kind of like a Midwestern niceness to him. But again, that being the case, he's very down-to-earth, very approachable, very nice guy. And you probably would be very hard-pressed not to have a good weekend out in the field with him if you ended up having that opportunity, because he is not without expertise. But I still don't like the show. The reason I don't like the show is mainly because of their format. They literally go to a new town and do literally the same thing every year, coupled with a whole lot of the bullshit freaking conjecture that you get out of Moneymaker, which is bullshit. He's making stuff up, and I've done this 25 years, so it must be so. No. That doesn't make you an expert. I've been doing this for 21. I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to be one. I don't play one on TV. Boo, you're still there. Anyway. For the record, I've never seen anyone actually in there, although the guy clearly keeps that up year-round. I don't know if he's hunting coyotes. I think that's the only thing in Connecticut you can legally hunt these days. Point to be made, though, regarding the original gentleman's comment about scarcity of black bears in the region. That is bullshit, because in the northeastern corner of Connecticut, when Cliff went out to do his portion of actually going out and doing outdoorsy shit, he actually laid claim to the fact that he had seen a black bear in Connecticut, and we do have them in great abundance. 2 weeks ago, we were hiking in this very area, and I came across black bear tracks. And to answer another person's question for that group, yes, they do wake up in the winter if it's warm enough. They're not able to hibernate through warmer times, and quite honestly, their stomach starts to grumble. They get up looking for food. That is, the hibernate all winter thing, if it's not wickedly cold, is a myth. They're not like zonked out in suspended animation. They may be holed up and staying out of the cold and all that, but they're not thoroughly asleep. As a couple of people found out when they found one of them actually denning under their deck or something. It's asleep. It doesn't want to be bothered. Leave them alone. You know, plain and simple. And then in the spring, he'll get up and go about his business, hopefully. But which makes you think that I have a soft spot for black bears, and generally I do. I don't. If I saw, though, I have seen the one in the neighborhood, so I can't say, well, if I see him, I'm going to freak, because I've seen him, and unless he's getting really fat on garbage can related leavings, which is unfortunate that he is. He was only about 150 pounds, which for a black bear is sizable but not huge. Anyway, let's get back to the intended subject matter. So this guy said, 6 big feet for every. If you're in a coastal area, unless you got a lot more forest up that way than I'm aware of, I would think you'd have more on the New Hampshire side. But even that, they have that tiny little bit of shoreline in New Hampshire. You don't think of New Hampshire as a ocean-going state. They do have a very small stretch of beach, but it's not a huge stretch. That being said, I don't know how forested that is. I'll go and I'll look when we get home. Woodpecker damage to a tree, not helping the tree any. Anyway, so a new potential project for the warmer months, I'm using the colder months to learn more about, is a thing I posted about on Facebook this week called LoRaWAN, which is a radio technology that is sort of kind of in the same ballpark as ham radio, GRMS or FRS or CB radio. The difference is that it's a completely free, license-free, you don't have to have a license to be an operator on it kind of thing. What it's useful for is mesh networking. So to take an example, I can throw out a scenario as an example that we encountered a couple of years back when I was still with Nezra, and they poorly planned the timing of an expedition to the same day that it was opening day for trophy buck season, and every hunter and their mother was out there. And what we found was two-way radios were being used by the hunters too, and you literally had so many people out there that you couldn't find a free channel without somebody on it. So for any kind of research-related OPSEC you might want to have, And yes, you do need OPSEC. I know that there's a guy on the same very group in Massachusetts that thinks you should share everything with everyone, which is crap, because then every noob within 50 miles comes to your area and fucks everything up. But that's my own personal bias. And I know he doesn't like it, and I don't personally care, because the guy's obviously a noob. Anyone that said, I've hiked all these trails. Yeah, have you been off trail? Point to be made. Yes, it's an open area. This is very easy hiking, but do you see a trail? No. No, you don't. Because there ain't one. But I do the same thing in Vermont under much rougher terrain, and navigating through a bushwhacking scenario and trail hiking are two completely different skills. And to that, as much as it's not really my intention past the point to talk smack to the gentleman, it doesn't make you an expert in jack shit pertaining to this kind of thing. So, moving on. The other nice thing about a fresh blanket of snow today is you notice how quiet it is, minus my yapping. If you were to have the audio happen again today, that pulsing sound, you're not going to have a problem hearing it. That being said, the OPSEC of the day, I'm fairly safe from running into anyone out here. There's one way in, one way out. There are 2 people up on the trail over that way who went cross-country skiing, but 1, I know what they're doing, and 2, trying to get through this on skis would probably ding the shit out of your skis, which are probably not cheap. And they, you're probably going to have a heck of a time getting, I mean, I'll snowshoe through areas like this, but it's still kind of a pain when you get into bumpy stuff. I mean, this is probably not that bad, but the other thing, again, for obfuscating where you go, snow leaves tracks, even yours. So if somebody was curious where you went, they can do it. They can find that out. So that being the case, I also have to go back and read the thing on my new car dash cam, because it said you can get on there and get video. I think you can get video off the app, but you can always pop the SD card too, but I just had that thought too. I was kind of had that set up for the first time, and I do have one complaint. I will do a review of the camera. I don't remember its brand name. It's one of the ones that's kind of in the $90 range, and it's not like the most feature-filled, but it is crisp 4K video in the front, but it has a rear-facing camera too, and the adhesive on the rear-facing camera, frankly, sucks. I actually had to use double-sided tape to stick it to the back window to have it stay. It's fine otherwise, but the adhesive on the back, I don't know what the difference is on that one, because with that one and the one I had previously in my old car, once you stick that front one on there, that stuff that you stick it with, I literally destroyed the underside of the base station on the old one, because I had to pry that off with a knife. And at one point I was kind of afraid I was going to bend the knife's blade, and it's like a small fixed blade pocket knife thing, which is fairly sturdy. But this one, I like the idea of the rear camera, because more likely than not, when you get into an accident, it's going to be you getting rear-ended. And when you get into some asshole that's trying to claim that it was your fault, which unfortunately for such a sap, the insurance companies, once they know that you tap them from behind, pretty much statistically by what they go on, you're automatically at fault. So don't rear-end somebody. But let's get back to LoRa, or LoRaWAN, which is long range frequency something. In America, the frequency range is different in Asia versus Europe versus the US and North America. In North America, the one number that it averages out to is about 915 megahertz versus I think it's like 400 something for Europe, and somewhere in the middle or lower end for Asia, I think. Because it seems like there's a lot of this in China too, because when you get into China, like America, is a big fucking place, and if you have a lot of... So the point I was getting back to, where I keep digressing, is that we had a day where the radio banter on the two-way radios, which is I want to say FRS radio because you can use those. It goes by channel basically. The lower end channels from like 1 through 7, I believe, are GRMS. And I don't think there's a very rabid FCC enforcement of the fact you need a license for GRMS. But technically, legally, you do need a license. Whereas FRS is free to use, which is, I believe, channels 8 through 14. So if you have a high power handheld two-way radio and you're on channel 8 or above, you're probably fine. You don't have to worry about that, although I've never heard of anyone ever getting in trouble for using the lower channels either. And quite honestly, you may not know. A lot of people probably don't unless they read the instructions. There may be something in there to let you know about that. Getting into a little bit of radio tech today. But LoRa radio is effectively, and other
point-to-point use for
nosy Nancy's aren't the use case for this,
unless they can actually they're
in a situation like I'm
there,
describing is you're not on their frequency. You're in there on your own little private mesh net, and the typical. There's two, depending on the equipment you have, you can encrypt this so that only you're basically if you're at the 2.4 kilohertz level, you probably end up with a range of 2.5 kilometers without like having something like a Yagi antenna like I have, which you put that up on a pole. The higher it is, it'll extend out. You can probably get closer to like 5 to 7 kilometers that way. Being that a lot of this equipment is made in Europe, you have to go by those little metric Nazi. I kid, but you know what I mean. That being said, I'm going to experiment with this technology over the course of the late winter and spring to get a better read on it. I have a transceiver coming in the mail that's like a tiny little hobbyist system board, not unlike a Raspberry Pi. I also this week got a LoRa board, which is a transceiver board that I am going to figure out how to attach to one of my 3 Raspberry Pis and see if I can make a base station / gateway out of that, which would be cool. But because that way you're actually having to like set some of this up on a almost programming the hardware level, which means you'll get a much better understanding of how some of this stuff works, which is kind of like being that I am a technical worker and I do IT, it's kind of second nature to me that I want to know all the moving parts and how it works on a core level, just because it's a neat concept. And I do know that there's a organization called the Meshtastic Project, which has, if I understood the video I saw on YouTube last night giving a tutorial on how to do this, there is an image for a Raspberry Pi with their software on there where you can set it up as if I understand right, a gateway, which is the concept here for those that are not technical people. There's also one from, I forget the name, I think it's a Heltec thing. It looks like it almost looks like a new agey looking like novelty lamplight thing, but it's actually a LoRa gateway that can also talk to devices over Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and it basically would be like your LoRa radio Alexa for the house, and you have like all these other things that are talking to it through that, and then you can share that data out on a mesh net to your neighbor like a mile away if they had a like network or a like gateway. This is like newer technology, so it's still taking off, but it would be a fun thing to have like a hobbyist level mesh net in the neighborhood where you can talk to your neighbors that way. Which, who knows, maybe I can like get a local community group or something going with that too, just to play with it. But it is like an actual usable technology in the scenario that I'm proposing, because you would have your own little mobile mesh net. And if you're out in the middle of nowhere, not so much in Connecticut, but once you get out into like northern Vermont, areas like that, or like the northern woods of Maine, you're getting into areas that are a lot bigger, a lot more remote, and a lot more not having a cell signal. So the one thing I'll say, you see a lot of ads on Facebook these days for these quote unquote unlimited range radios that are basically operating on, but they operate on 4G. If you don't have a cell tower and you don't have a signal, your long range freaking unlimited radio doesn't have a signal. It's still dependent on cellular technology and cellular networks. You need a SIM card for it. It is basically an encryptable. And yes, I know the government hates encryption. Boo-hoo. You're never going to get rid of totally get rid of encryption. It's going to be there, and you'll just have to make your peace with it. There, government politician people listening to me. But without getting into politics, the point and the reason why these are a scam is they're trying to sell them clearly to like a prepper survivalist crowd, who probably, if they know their stuff, are going to know the clear limitations. It's a cellular network. If shit actually hits the fan and the freaking cellular networks are down, your charming little toy is now useless. It's basically a stripped down encryptable cell phone. It's not a radio. It's kind of sort of operating like one, but it's using cellular technology. It's a stripped down cell phone being mismarketed and misrepresented to survivalists and prepper noobs who probably don't know any better. So you heard it here first. They're a scam. Don't waste your money, because I think they're like $300 for a unit for like a pair of them, which is just a waste. If you're in an urban area, you're probably fine until, again, if shit hits a fan and all the things turn off, you're not going to get shit out of those. You're going to need like real radio. LoRa radio would be perfect for that, because you don't need an outgoing or an existing infrastructure. You basically are making that infrastructure node by node. It's almost like a telegraph from like earlier days. I mean, you're stepping back in time a little bit conceptually, but so there's that. Thinking on things Bigfoot related, we had the verbal disagreement with this one guy, but he was gracious about it, so I'm not going to say it's an argument. It was I disagree with some of his premises, but he seems like a reasonable enough gent that you could agree to disagree like adults, which is a rare thing in Bigfooting. And, you know, I don't know how forested his neighborhood is. I'm not going to pretend that I do. But in north central and northwestern Connecticut and probably northern Mass, I can assure you there is no shortage of black bears. They may be sleeping this time of year, but look at what you're dealing with. As of right now, I am wearing a coat, I'm wearing a hat, I'm wearing gloves because, incidentally, some of the best gloves I've ever had, because you can still use your cell phone without taking them off. Reasonable dexterity, and they do keep your fingertips warm to a reasonable degree when you don't have wind out here. Today, you don't have a lot of wind. It's still, right now up here, it's about 26 degrees. It is not balmy. What I'm finding a surprising lack of, though, is like, the only tracks around right now are mine. Actually, I take that back. There were some deer tracks on the way in, but there's not as many as you would think. And I wonder if there's like, just like because of the timber harvesting. I mean, it's not a clear cut, obviously. It's a proper timber harvest where they thinned out certain trees. And the reason they're doing that largely is because, and this is my forestry class talking, I think it's the Asian wood borer, but it's an invasive insect, and they go after certain types of trees, and that basically means that you have to get rid of the infected trees, which then affects negatively the biodiversity of the forest. And it's not a good thing, and hopefully it'll recover over time, but then Asia needs to keep their fucking invasive beetles and borers to themselves. Boring insects are one of the worst kind of invasive species you can have bug-wise, because they bore into the pulpy part of the tree, and that's what kills the tree. And fuck you, Asian wood borers. You're not helping. Another kind of invasive insect, just because I'm on that subject now as we ramble through various subjects today. The deer cat is actually an invasive insect out of China. It looks like a six-legged tick with wings. And it does suck blood just like a tick. The only difference is it's not known at this point in time to transmit any deadly diseases, where ticks, as we all well know, are a gateway to Lyme disease, dengue fever, and all kinds of fun shit. So, and you do in New England actually have snow ticks, which are thankfully, they're common on moose and I guess deer, but as ticks go, they're actually friggin' huge. They're not hard to see. So if you had one on you, you'd see it. I mean, whereas deer ticks are these tiny little things. The best way to deal with them in the summer is just to coat your stuff with permethrin, because generally speaking, ticks are only, their gateway of entry, if you don't brush up against a tree, is about 1 meter down. So they're not dropping out of the trees on average to drop on your head. It's more the matter that they're going to like crawl up your boot, under your leg and stuff like that. Or there was one time when before I was using permethrin, I went out for a hike late summer and I stopped to answer nature's call, which means you had to drop trow. And at the time I took to do that and got home, I went to change clothes to get out of my hiking stuff because it was hot. But then again, I noticed right in the middle of my quadricep, there's a little bastard. Like, he was already head first into my leg and sucking away like a little SOB that he was. So there is a sadistic pleasure in getting them out with tweezers and applying them to an open burner on your stove to let them die a gruesome death. And no sympathy for them. Anyway, that being said, I'm on the verge of a segment break because this is becoming, it was rambling, it's going to be rambling. I'll just point out something. There are those out there that would point out this tree break right here as being like Bigfoot evidence, and I want you to notice two things. It is probably, I'll conservatively say 10 feet off the ground. However, look up there and see the tree swaying in the distance. That's wind. And if you have enough wind, and this area is prone to some very high winds. We're not supposed to have a lot up here today. It's actually more wind than we're supposed to have, but it's not uncommon to have wind come through here 34, 40 miles an hour, and that can snap a small tree like that. So I'm sorry to all you finding Bigfoot stick structure worshippers, but the fact is gravity and wind and snow load, if not humans. That little sound right there is a tree straining under wind. So for all the misidentifications going on in Bigfooting right now, it can be remedied by three things. 3 words. Know the land. Learn the land, know the land. Well, love the land too, but the fact is, know the land and you'll know what things are. You've seen me spend a fair amount of time out in this stretch of the woods, and I do know this area pretty well. I'm not going to likely get lost in here, knock on wood, to not jinx myself, but the fact is, one, with snow, you can literally backtrack your tracks out of here and go back the way you came, number one. Number two, navigational aids I mentioned. Over there is a stream. It runs that way to the pond I came in on. And probably goes that way for some way. I could follow that a lot further in today, but I'm not really going to because the weather is... I don't think we're in for snowy weather beyond a point. However, up here, as far north as we are, there is a different snow zone. Connecticut basically breaks down to 3 different snow zones. If you're on the shore, you get sloppy, crappy ice. If you're in the middle like we are, you're in the middle of what I call the slush belt. You get a mix of rain and sleet and snow, which makes the crustiest, shittiest stuff to scrape off your car. But up here, you're not in the mountains, but you are in foothills, and the foothills can get a rapid shift in weather, and I'm kind of keeping an eye on that now because it's fine, granular, minor snow level, so it's not a huge deal. Also over there is the trail that I came in on. You're not really in such a... I mean, this area goes... If you go that way or that way, you can go easily 5 miles and not come out of the woods in any direction or see anyone. It's not that it's a small area, but for the sake of today and the relative combination of plans I have later, as it is Valentine's Day weekend for my better half and I, because we were busy during the week, and other considerations, and keeping an eye on the snow, it makes for a pretty video, but it's also something to keep an eye on because I have found myself in a whiteout before under conditions like this, so I am kind of staying parallel to the trail for a reason. There's not any real activity in this area of late, but other areas north of here I can kind of say the same. And case in point, there are my tracks. So you can just follow these out if you had to. And I will do that for a while, because that's a part of the area I found myself in. Now, if you had some big freaking clawed like monster feet following me that weren't there before, I'd be concerned for obvious reasons. But again, not being a strong believer in Dogman, if I ever found myself wrong on that, I will be radically reevaluating my outdoors related hobbies, because fuck the wolf, man. That's where I draw the line. Not dealing with that. I've encountered bears. I've encountered moose. I've encountered a mountain lion. And yes, Connecticut does have the odd mountain lion from time to time. They're not native, but they do pass through, and about 3 miles that way, up on a hill over there, I did interrupt one's lunch. He didn't make it on camera, but his lunch, the fresh deer killed, did. On one of my videos, I think from 2019. Somewhere, I think that year. So it is out there. Another landmark is that lovely blind. I think at this point I'm going to take a segment break, as I'm running out of things to talk about. And it does seem like this is kind of like a rambly video, so we're going to minimize that as much as we can at this point by taking a break. And depending on weather and things, I'm going to be back in a bit. I was going to fly the drone today, but wind and snow and moisture in the air have made this kind of not the best day for doing that suddenly. So again, foothills and mountains and shifting weather patterns are what make hiking in this kind of an environment that much more interesting and subject to change without notice, sometimes on a very rapid pace. Hasn't got that far so far, but with the wind kicking up, there's a possibility of a whiteout. So I am kind of like, if you haven't noticed, I'm meandering my way back the way I came, and I am keeping an eye on that. Say the temperature just took a so I'm going to take a break, and I'll be back at 15 degrees. It's a lot colder than it was before. I mean, granted, the wind kicked up, but it got a lot colder. I do believe one of my last comments was to the effect of rapidly changing weather in the hills and mountains, and we're seeing that happen right before us. To finish up my radio thought, I was going to describe also, I have, which could be used as a walkie-talkie, mind you, a ham radio handset, which effectively is a transceiver transmitter for radio, UHF, VHF, and it's effectively a mobile radio like ham operators use. You can broadcast from it, so it does pay to know what frequencies are what and what you should and should not do, because number one, ham radio operators are a fairly self-policing bunch by reputation, and if they find out there's a rogue operator without a license in the area, they will turn you into the FCC. And I imagine, I don't know about jail time, but you're probably going to have some hefty fines to pay, if nothing else, and they'll take your equipment. But it's an interesting piece of technology. I'm not advocating abuse of frequencies, but it does give you access to ham radio frequencies. So listening in is probably fine. But you also have access to frequencies on the GRMS and FRS bands, which you can listen into or transmit on. Again, I've never really heard of heinous enforcement of GRMS, but you do need a license, whereas FRS have at it. You also can get FM and AM radio. You can get the National Weather Service for weather for the day when you're out there. We've used that in the past in the woods. And also, today'd be a good day for that, by the way. And you also can hit, interestingly enough, unencrypted police and EMS frequencies. Kind of like a police scanner. The only problem there is a lot of your police channels are becoming digital. And I know this from working in government. And because of that, you're not going to probably be able to get those over that kind of a handset anymore, which is just as well, because if you accidentally transmitted on there and said something and they traced it back to you, that probably is illegal on a level where you're basically interfering with emergency services or something, which is a criminal charge. So you probably don't want to do that. So it is a freely available, not freely, but it is a piece of technology that you can purchase free of charge, free of any need to like have it licensed or regulated beyond a point, but it does come with some responsibility in that you have, it is your responsibility to know what you can and cannot do legally and be a good citizen on the air, because if you're not, if they catch you, there are consequences. And you're only going to get away with it for so long, because you live in an age, this is again the IT worker in me talking. If you're doing shit online, it's traceable. You can be on a VPN. VPNs can be subpoenaed by the cops. If they save logs, they can hand that over. If they don't save logs, well, then the cops are out of luck. But ISPs can still track your connection to the VPN. If they know what the VPN is and they know their infrastructure for specific transitional IP addresses and MAC addresses, they can still trace you. It's a little bit harder, but if they want you bad enough, this is the point. It would really come down to how egregious a thing you did. Some minor prank level stuff, they're not going to care past the point. They'd probably come to your door and say, knock it off. If you do it again, we're going to come back and get you. But if you're doing crypto ransomware shit or something like that, you're going to go up the priority poll very quickly and they're going to find you. And they don't fuck around with that, because you're basically costing money to infrastructure and people in corporate spaces that have a lot more money than you do for lawyers. So that's a very expensive version of silly games and silly prizes. Having completely deviated from anything remotely, just as I was going to wrap up on an outro, the fisheye lens camera basically gave up on battery life, probably due to the cold. I think I had it fully charged before. I could be wrong on that note too, but it decided that it was done, so we're going to wrap up on this. We're going to wrap up the video. We yapped about what we did, introduction to LoRaWAN radio and things like that, a dispute that I had with a guy, things of this nature. And with that being pretty much to cover up where we are and the weather kind of turning south again, we're going to wrap this up. So like, subscribe, leave any suggestion for things you want me to do differently in the comments, and we'll take them under advisement. But this is going to be one more in the books, and we will catch you next time. That's about it. Bye.